HanK again. I found another article that kind of tweaked my interest a little bit. I was going through some Google ads and I saw a headline about human trafficking. And I've been doing a little bit of research, and I'm going to continue doing research on human trafficking. There is a lot of concern of human trafficking that exists today, and it's alarming because it's getting more popular or growing. Right now, it stands that the human trafficking industry is the second largest industry in the world. It's only second to drug trafficking. And human trafficking is such a concern for the modern citizen, but found to be profitable for those that work through human trafficking, that actually are the human traffickers. Because right now there's not much that can oppose them other than being physically caught, because there is not a proper judicial approach for punishment. In other words, if a person is caught for human trafficking, they are more likely to be let go and set free than a person that is caught doing drugs. So the risk of human trafficking, the risk of being caught, doesn't meet or exceed the profits. So there is your reason you see human trafficking becoming as popular today as what it has been. And human trafficking, just to make it known, human trafficking is nothing more than just a form of slavery. Yes, human trafficking is slavery. It is forcing people to live and work in conditions that is not life-supporting. And human traffickers understand that once they trap a person into human trafficking, they don't need to provide necessary care. One of the main or bigger processes of human trafficking is sneaking those individuals into the country. And I'll go over that here shortly. I want to go through specifics real quick. Right now in the world, there is more than 27 victims that are in the human trafficking ring. 27 million victims. That industry has been proven to bring in more than $30 billion a year. $30 billion. I actually believe it's closer to $42 billion at this time. But it goes to reflect the fact that it is a growing industry. Right now, the United States stands to lead the world in human trafficking. There's no way around that. The numbers and statistics reflect that the United States leads the world in human trafficking, and I wonder why that may be. But hopefully in the near future we'll start learning more about that. Out of the 27 million victims entered into human trafficking, 2% or less will ever be rescued or found. That is a very, very low number. And we live in a world today where technology is starting to lead the way. It is the tip of the sword, so to speak, when getting things going. And there are many ways that a human trafficker identifies their target. Let's go to South America. South America has liberalized their laws specifically for labor so that human trafficking is considered a legal industry. In some locations in South America, they actually hold an annual parade. And in this parade, what they do is they take their victims that they have and they will dress them in shiny, scantily clad outfits, put on loud music, and parade them around the town, making them dance. And the person that has the most people and plays the loudest music is looked to be the number one in the industry. And in many South American cities and even countries or states, however you view it, human trafficking is a better option for employment than going to school. So that is something that we stand as Americans and as society in general, that is something we stand to have to face and fight. Because we're living in a world where people accept maltreatment of other people. There's no way around it. In our own country, living in a city such as Tampa Bay, Florida is ranked third, the third worst city in human trafficking in the United States. And it makes you wonder where New York and Chicago and Los Angeles and Houston and all these other cities, makes you wonder where they stand. And one of the things that I find extremely disturbing is the process of acquiring the victims. For example, it has been known that in South America, they want to move, some of the citizens of South America want to move north into, let's say, the United States of America to earn a better life. Well, when those individuals try to find their means to gain access into America, they deal with the human traffickers. So these people wanting to migrate into the United States will find a human trafficker who identifies themselves as a friend to their soon-to-be victims, and the victim will pay a couple of $1,000s to be taken into the United States. During that process, the human trafficker will confiscate any kind of credentials for that person that shows that they exist. And then once they get into the United States, that victim is explained that they have to earn their freedom. Now, that's when it becomes a sex trafficking concern or cheap labor. Now, for cheap labor, you got the human traffickers that have already rooted themselves in the industry well enough where they can contact manufacturing companies and kind of hire out their victims, charging whoever maximum amount for labor, but keeping that money to themselves and never sharing that money with the victim. And occasionally the victim will receive $5 or $10 or whatever it costs to feed them. They got to keep them fed so that they can continue to produce or be productive. So, and they work in these harsh conditions and they get paid nothing, and they never see the light of day of freedom. Then on the sex slavery side, it's the same process. It's just a different person handling the victims, because there is always a demand for prostitution. I mean, in human nature, we have the animalistic tendencies, and some people indulge or splurge in the mindset of sex. So that there lies the reason sex trafficking truly exists. And we have seen and learned of these scandals that exist. Well, look at Kevin Spacey. Kevin Spacey apologizes for raping a teenage boy, accuses the entertainment industry for making him the way he was, and never seen the light of day behind bars. Actually continues to act. And there are so many others. I'd hate to speculate how far up the tree this actually would go, and I'm sure that we would be extremely surprised. We've seen dashes and somewhat details of these books that shows transactions of elitists going to a designated island for sex with teenage victims. But nobody can engage in breaking that process up, because that island is financed by rich people who have sovereignty and have influenced that little island with their own state laws. So there are instances of human trafficking that are happening right under our own noses, and we have done nothing to repel it, to prevent it. And one of the biggest things I think that we can do as a society is put our ears to the grinder, be more observant. We know that one of the forms of trafficking comes from people being on the internet. I spent time with a fellow that I was in the military with. We were on deployment. He got an emergency notice, was flown back home. When I got back to the States after that deployment, I had learned that his daughter disappeared. Shortly after that, another gentleman from that same command was faced with a similar circumstance during the next deployment. Both of their daughters were teenagers, and in further inspection of the evidence, it was learned that the females were in contact with their perpetrator, who presented themselves to be around their same age, and upon review of their text messages and emails, they were sharing their life story and indifferences of how off-putting their lives were. So a strategy of this person was to gain the trust and interest of the target. And once that person gained that trust, he was able to seduce the young person into meeting them, tricked them into meeting them, and once they agreed and actually went, you can see the path in the emails up to the point where the perpetrator coached the adolescent into leaving through the bedroom windows, and that was the last the children were seen. A another buddy, when I was stationed abroad overseas, he had decided to take a vacation trip with his wife to island just off the coast of Spain. And he was off in one shop, his wife was in another, and his wife was abducted out from under his nose. She was never seen again. The fella actually requested termination of his active duty status so he could pursue the people that abducted his wife. He was never heard from again. So he wasn't like my best friend, but we worked out a lot together when we were at the pool and at the gym. So those are 3 definite stories that I'm aware of. And then someone really close, near and dear to me nearly fell circumstance to the same, or victim to the same circumstance. It was my niece. She was talking to another individual on the phone. She was unhappy. You know how teenagers can be. They're extremely emotional in some cases. And in this sense, my niece was just looking for acceptance, for someone that would show her attention and affection. Not because her parents wasn't providing that for her, but obviously it was because she wanted more of it. She was missing or lacking the attention she wanted. So she searched it out and found an individual who presented themselves to be 17 years old. She was 16, and they had talked about meeting and stuff. And the day that she was supposed to go and sneak out and meet him, just hours before the event, the sheriff knocks on her front door. Her mom answers, and the sheriff lets them know that the perpetrator was actually 37 years old, had been found guilty of sex crimes before, but was still out and about doing things that he was already doing. But the reason they caught him was he was supposed to check in with his parole officer earlier that morning and failed to do so. Luckily, the parole officer contacted law enforcement. The law enforcement engaged. They go to the fella's house. They see that he has a laptop. It's against his parole requirements. They gain access to the computer. They find the conversation. They learn that he was supposed to meet with my niece. That led them knocking on my sister's door to let them know that this fella was going to meet her, get her drunk and drug her up, have her perform sexual acts, and then kidnap her. I mean, I am one person, and I've already had 4 human trafficking incidents happen around me. People, this happens in our backyard. Human trafficking is another means of slavery. Don't forget that. And there is no discrimination. Absolutely none. Human traffickers don't care if you're male, female, young, old. They don't care of your ethnicity. They don't care about your culture, your background, your heritage. They don't care. You are a dollar sign. And if we continue to make ourselves vulnerable, it allows these predators to easily target us. There have been cases revealed where some of the older people that were found in human trafficking were well into their 50s and 60s, but had been a part of human trafficking for well over 30, 40 years. For the majority of their life, that's all they knew. I've seen not articles, but they are court documents and case documents where a child at the age of 7 months old was found in a brothel. He had been laying on his back for so long that the back of his head had become flat to the surface of the table or bed that he was laying in. And it was learned that the child would receive his food in the payment of semen. Yes, that's right. Men was having oral sex with this child and feeding them with his semen. The child had been subjected to this for a long enough period to where the back of his head was flat. That just gives you an idea that there is no discrimination or bias against culture, gender, age. Nothing matters. But what does matter is that this is a growing legacy. Human trafficking is no joke. It is in every 50 states of the United States of America. Granted, some cities are worse than others, but you can be living in podunk nowhere, in the middle of nowhere, and find yourself victimized by human traffickers. So people, we need to raise the level of awareness, and we need to challenge our judicial system to confront and combat this very issue. People are having issues with Donald Trump building the wall. It is this dreaded thing that looms over everyone's head because it impedes on the safety and freedom of others. It's funny to me that people actually believe that when these people are apprehended from while they're crossing the border, that it is being said that those people are being separated from their families and kept in all these harsh living conditions, which is not true. It is not true. Yes, they are detained, but they are provided food and shelter and water, which they did not have. And a good portion, if not the majority, of those with children claiming that they are getting their child into the United States are not actually related to that child, but indeed are the ones trafficking that child. So that wall that so many of you wish would not be built helps deter that from happening within the borders of this country. It's not going to stop it, you're right. But it does slow it down, and it helps us to prepare for the next level so that we can get the ball rolling. And if we don't do something, you can find yourself sitting victim, just as anyone else in this world. Now, these predators are not just sitting back on their heels waiting for you to find them on the internet. No. I mean, there are thousands of ways that a human trafficking predator will search for their victims. But they search for vulnerability. That's all it is. And if we present ourselves as being vulnerable, then you become a target. And it's hard to prevent yourself from being a target, but the best way to do it is increase your level of awareness. And then, whenever the subject matter comes up, discuss it with others. Share the truth. Don't just pawn it off as not important. I would beg to differ on the concept of the idea that some of our top government officials have their hands and their feet knee deep and elbow deep into the process of human trafficking. At some point along the line, someone up there in the chunk chain is aware of human trafficking and has the ability to prevent it from happening, but is reluctant to do so because as long as the human trafficking exists, they find themselves profiting. So our own government, so to speak, is subjecting us to that possibility. So what are you going to do? How are we going to combat human trafficking? It's not a joke. It's not something to take lightly. And quite frankly, it's rather frightening. I mean, your neighbor can be a part of this. It is being found that some of the houses, I mentioned Tampa Bay, Florida earlier. It is such a big industry that it has been found that some of these houses that live in rural Tampa or urban Tampa Bay, like in suburbia or whatever, and even downtown, they are finding people all over living in these conditions that would give an average person nightmares. And this happens every day. I mean, just recently, I think he was 13 from here in Tampa Bay. He was abducted more than a year ago by someone that presented themselves as a friendly person that just wanted to be friends. And again, the child went off and met that person. A year later, that child had been abducted, and he was just most recently found here in the city of Tampa Bay. Him and one other child that had been abducted more recently. But the point is this is happening in your neighborhood, your own backyard. So how can we unite to fix this problem? I challenge you. I challenge you to make a difference. Voice your opinion. Be heard. Stand up for something. Don't be a mindless sheep and follow along and just accept it. Accepting it is worse than doing nothing. Stand up and help stop this. Human trafficking is not a situation that should be taken lightly. It can restructure the modern world, the way that this world does business. It can change everything. It's a fine line. But if society accepts it, our judicial system will not act on it. Until society says enough is enough, it's going to get worse. It's always been said things have got to get worse before they get better. Well, here's one of those things I think may have to get worse before it gets better. And it's only going to get better if you engage. So join me. Let's do this. HanK.